The scorching heat of Forward Operating Base Sentinel hit like a physical blow every morning at 0600 hours, but Staff Sergeant Isabella Rodriguez had long since stopped noticing. She'd been deployed to this dusty corner of Afghanistan for 8 months now, and the relentless sun, the ever-present smell of diesel fuel, and the constant hum of generators had become as familiar as breathing. What she hadn't gotten used to was the attitude of some of the newer arrivals, particularly the fresh-faced private first class who was currently glaring at her across the morning briefing tent. Ethan Walker had arrived at FOB Sentinel 3 weeks ago with the kind of confidence that only came from graduating top of his class at Fort Benning and possessing an engineering degree from Georgia Tech. At 22, he was smart, capable, and absolutely certain that his modern military training and educational background made him more qualified than anyone else to assess tactical situations. The fact that his squad leader was a 31-year-old woman who looked like she belonged in a college classroom rather than a combat zone only reinforced his belief that the Army's promotion system was more concerned with political correctness than actual competence. "All right, listen up," Rodriguez began, her voice carrying easily across the tent despite its quiet tone. "Today's patrol route takes us through Sector 7, past the village of Kalar and up to Checkpoint Bravo. Intelligence suggests increased insurgent activity in the area, so we're modifying our standard approach." She pointed to the tactical map spread across the folding table. "Instead of taking the main road, we'll use the Wadi system to the north. It's longer, but it keeps us below the ridgeline and away from known IED emplacements." Walker's hand shot up immediately. "Sergeant, with respect, that route adds 2 hours to our patrol time. If we're concerned about IEDs, wouldn't it make more sense to use the mine rollers and sweep the main road? We've got the equipment, and it's what we trained for." Several other soldiers in the tent shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the first time Walker had questioned Rodriguez's tactical decisions, and the tension was becoming palpable. Rodriguez studied the young private's face, noting the earnest conviction there, the absolute certainty that his suggestion was not only valid, but obviously superior to hers. "Private Walker, I appreciate your input, but the decision is made. We use the Wadi system. If you have concerns about the mission, you're free to discuss them with me privately after the briefing." Walker's jaw tightened. "I'm just saying, Sergeant, maybe we should consider all our options before committing to a route that puts us in potential killing grounds we haven't properly assessed." Corporal Jessica Lane, a seasoned soldier who'd been deployed twice before, shot Walker a warning look. She'd seen enough new guys come through to recognize the type. Smart, educated, convinced that their classroom knowledge trumped hard-earned experience. She'd also seen enough of Rodriguez in action to know that the staff sergeant's tactical instincts had kept their squad alive through some hairy situations over the past 8 months. Rodriguez stood up slowly, her 5'6" frame somehow commanding the attention of every soldier in the tent. "Private Walker, let me be absolutely clear about something. I've been making these kinds of decisions for over a decade. I've walked more patrols than you've had hot meals since basic training. When I tell you we're taking a specific route, it's because I've analyzed every piece of available intelligence, considered every tactical option, and chosen the path that gives us the best chance of completing our mission and bringing everyone home alive." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Now, I understand that you're eager to contribute, and I respect that. But questioning orders in front of the squad undermines unit cohesion and discipline. If you have tactical concerns, bring them to me privately. If you can't accept the chain of command and follow orders, then you need to seriously reconsider whether you belong in the infantry." Walker's face flushed red. Whether from embarrassment or anger, it was hard to tell. "I'm not trying to undermine anything, Sergeant. I'm just trying to make sure we don't walk into something we could have avoided." "And I am trying to make sure we don't get blown up on a road that's been targeted by every insurgent cell in the province," Rodriguez replied firmly. "The Wadi route keeps us alive, Walker. Trust me on this one." The briefing continued with the detailed planning that preceded every patrol. Ammunition loads, communication protocols, contingency plans, and rules of engagement. Walker participated professionally, but his body language radiated skepticism. He took notes, asked appropriate questions about logistics, but anyone watching closely could see that he remained unconvinced by his squad leader's tactical choices. After the other soldiers had filed out to prepare their gear, Walker approached Rodriguez at the map table. "Sergeant, I want to be clear that I respect your rank and your experience, but I also think it's important to voice concerns when I have them. Isn't that what good soldiers are supposed to do?" Rodriguez looked up from the intelligence report she was reviewing. Walker was standing at attention, his posture correct, his tone respectful, but she could see the stubborn conviction in his eyes. He genuinely believed he was right, and that made him dangerous. Not because of malicious intent, but because overconfidence could get people killed. "Walker, let me ask you something," she said, setting down the papers. "How many combat patrols have you been on since you arrived?" 14, Sergeant. "And how many times have you taken contact?" Walker hesitated. "Twice, but both were very minor engagements." Rodriguez nodded. "I've been on over 400 combat patrols across 3 deployments. I've been in firefights that lasted hours, survived IED attacks that should have killed me, and made split-second decisions that determined whether soldiers lived or died. Experience isn't just about time in service, Walker. It's about learning from situations that you can't simulate in training, and understanding that sometimes the textbook solution will get you killed." She stood up and moved to the tent opening, looking out at the bustling activity of the forward operating base. Soldiers were loading vehicles, checking equipment, and preparing for another day of missions in hostile territory. The Wadi route isn't just about avoiding IEDs. It's about understanding the enemy's patterns, knowing where they've been successful before, and recognizing that sometimes the longer path is the smarter path. Walker joined her at the tent opening, his expression thoughtful. "I understand that experience matters, Sergeant, but doesn't fresh perspective have value too? Sometimes someone who hasn't been doing things the same way for years might see opportunities or risks that others miss." It was a fair point, and Rodriguez had to admit that Walker's engineering background had been useful in some situations. His technical knowledge had helped them solve equipment problems, and his analytical approach to planning had occasionally highlighted details that others might have overlooked. But tactical decision-making in combat was different from solving engineering problems, and the consequences of being wrong were measured in lives rather than project delays. "You're right that fresh perspective has value," she acknowledged. "But it has to be balanced with experience and situational awareness. When we're outside the wire, my job is to bring everyone back alive. Every decision I make is filtered through that priority. Sometimes that means taking calculated risks, and sometimes it means choosing caution over efficiency." Walker nodded slowly. "I can respect that, Sergeant. I guess I'm just used to environments where the best technical solution is usually the right answer. Out here, the right answer is the one that keeps us breathing long enough to ask the question again tomorrow. Give it time, Walker. You'll understand the difference soon enough."
An hour later, the squad was loaded into their MRAPs and moving out through the main gate of FOB Sentinel. The morning sun was already brutal, and inside the armored vehicles, the temperature was climbing toward unbearable, despite the air conditioning working overtime. Rodriguez rode in the lead vehicle, her eyes constantly scanning the terrain ahead while monitoring radio communications from base and other units in the area. Walker was in the second MRAP with Corporal Lane and Private Mitchell, still nursing his frustration from the morning briefing. As they turned away from the main road toward the Wadi system Rodriguez had selected, he couldn't help but voice his concerns again. "I still think we're making this harder than it needs to be," Walker muttered, watching the rocky terrain through his window. "The main road would have had us at Checkpoint Bravo an hour ago." Lane looked up from her rifle maintenance. "Walker, you really need to learn when to keep your opinions to yourself. The sergeant knows what she's doing." "Does she, though?" Walker asked, his voice carrying just enough volume that the vehicle commander, Sergeant Marcus Thompson, couldn't help but hear. "I mean, I get that she's got experience, but sometimes experience can make you overly cautious, maybe even paranoid. Thompson, a grizzled veteran with 12 years in the Army, turned around from the front seat. "Private, let me give you some free advice. That woman up there has kept more soldiers alive than you'd probably met in your entire life. I've served under a lot of leaders, and she's one of the best tactical minds I've ever seen. So maybe instead of questioning her judgment, you should be trying to learn from it." Walker fell silent, but his skepticism remained evident. The convoy continued through the Wadi system, following a dried riverbed that snaked between low hills covered with scrub brush and scattered rocks. It was rough going, much slower than the main road would have been, and Walker couldn't shake the feeling that they were being overly cautious. Meanwhile, in the lead vehicle, Rodriguez was monitoring multiple radio channels while keeping watch on the terrain. Her driver, Specialist Lucas Gray, had been working with her for 6 months and had learned to read her moods and instincts. "Sergeant, you seem more alert than usual today. Something specific bothering you?" Rodriguez adjusted her position to get a better view of the ridgeline to their right. "Intelligence was pretty vague about the insurgent activity in this area. That usually means they know something happened but don't know exactly what. Could be nothing, could be everything." "And Walker's attitude isn't helping," Gray added. Rodriguez glanced at him. "Walker's not malicious, just inexperienced. He'll learn, one way or another. I just hope it doesn't have to be the hard way." As if summoned by their conversation, Walker's voice crackled over the radio from the second vehicle. "Lead vehicle, this is Walker. I'm seeing what looks like fresh vehicle tracks on the main road paralleling our route. No signs of disturbance. Are we sure we wouldn't be better off switching to the faster route?" Thompson's voice immediately cut in. "Walker, maintain radio discipline. Personal observations go through your vehicle commander first." But Rodriguez had already grabbed her binoculars and was studying the main road in the distance. Walker was right. There were fresh tracks and no obvious signs of IED emplacements. For a moment, she questioned her own decision. The main road looked clear, and they were already behind schedule thanks to the slower Wadi route. Then she saw it, a glint of sunlight off metal from the ridgeline, quickly disappearing. It could have been anything: a piece of trash, a broken mirror, natural minerals in the rock. But her instincts, honed by years of experience, screamed warning. "All vehicles, halt!" she commanded over the radio. The convoy stopped immediately, engines idling while Rodriguez studied the ridge through her binoculars. She swept the area methodically, looking for anything that didn't belong. "What's the holdup?" Walker's voice came over the radio again, his impatience clear. "Possible observation post on the ridge," Rodriguez replied tersely. "Investigating." She handed the binoculars to Gray. 2 o'clock, about 800 meters up the ridgeline. "Tell me what you see." Gray studied the area for several minutes before nodding. "Could be a fighting post. Definitely some kind of constructed hide. Fresh digging, maybe." Rodriguez keyed her radio. "Base, this is Patrol 7. We have possible enemy observation post overlooking the main road at grid reference." She provided the coordinates and requested intelligence update. The response came back within minutes. "Patrol 7, be advised that grid reference is confirmed insurgent overwatch position. IED strike on convoy using the main road occurred at that location 72 hours ago. 3 coalition casualties." A chill ran through Rodriguez, despite the heat. If they had taken Walker's suggestion and used the main road, they would have driven directly into a kill zone with enemy spotters already in position to trigger whatever explosives had been emplaced.
"All vehicles, continue on current route," she ordered. "Maintain spacing and watch for secondary positions." In the second MRAP, the radio conversation had been heard by everyone. Walker sat in stunned silence, processing the implications. If Rodriguez hadn't chosen the Wadi route, if she had listened to his suggestions about using the main road, they could all be dead or wounded right now. "Still thinks she's being overly cautious?" Thompson asked quietly. Walker didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about the intelligence briefing, about Rodriguez's calm explanation of why the Wadi route was safer, about his own certainty that he knew better. The fresh vehicle tracks he'd seen weren't evidence of safety. They were evidence of previous convoys that had been lured into using the main road, possibly the same convoy that had been hit 3 days earlier. I didn't realize," Walker finally said. Lane looked up from her weapon. That's the problem, Walker. You don't realize what you don't realize. The sergeant's job is to know things that the rest of us miss, to see patterns that we can't see, and to make decisions based on information and experience that we don't have. The convoy continued through the Wadi system, and Walker found himself paying attention to details he'd missed before. The way Rodriguez positioned the vehicles to avoid predictable patterns, how she varied their speed and spacing to make it harder for enemy observers to track their movement, the constant radio checks with base and other units to maintain situational awareness. It was like watching a chess master play against an invisible opponent, thinking several moves ahead, while the rest of them could barely see the current position on the board. Walker began to understand that his engineering background, while valuable, had given him expertise in solving defined problems with known variables. Combat leadership required managing infinite variables, many of them unknown, while making decisions with incomplete information and life-or-death consequences. As they approached Checkpoint Bravo 2 hours later than originally scheduled, Walker realized that his criticism of the longer route had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of priorities. He'd been focused on efficiency, getting from point A to point B as quickly as possible. Rodriguez had been focused on effectiveness, getting from point A to point B with everyone alive and mission accomplished. The checkpoint inspection went smoothly, with local Afghan forces cooperative and no signs of insurgent activity in the immediate area. As they prepared to return to FOB Sentinel, Walker found himself wondering what other assumptions he'd been making about leadership, about combat, and about the woman who'd just potentially saved all of their lives without them even knowing they'd been in danger. 2 weeks after the Wadi incident, Walker thought he'd learned his lesson about questioning Rodriguez's tactical decisions. He'd been more respectful during briefings, kept his opinions to himself during patrols, and even started paying closer attention to the subtle ways Rodriguez read the battlefield. But old habits die hard, especially when they're reinforced by years of academic success and natural intelligence. The mission that would test Walker's newfound humility was supposed to be routine, a presence patrol through the village of Kalar to show coalition support for local governance and gather intelligence on insurgent activity. The village elders had requested increased security presence after several nights of intimidation tactics by Taliban fighters, and higher command wanted to demonstrate that coalition forces were responsive to community concerns. Rodriguez gathered the squad in the briefing tent at 0500 hours, the pre-dawn darkness still thick outside. The mission seemed straightforward enough. Enter the village, conduct a walking patrol through the main market area, meet with the village elder, and establish a temporary checkpoint on the main road for 2 hours before returning to base. Intel indicates low threat level, Rodriguez began, pointing to aerial photographs of the village. But remember, low threat doesn't mean no threat. We'll enter from the north, establish overwatch positions on buildings 3 and 7, then conduct the patrol in 2-man teams with constant visual contact. Walker studied the photographs, his engineering mind automatically analyzing the layout. The village was built around a central market square, with narrow alleyways branching off in multiple directions. Most of the buildings were single-story mud brick construction with flat roofs, perfect for observation posts. What caught his attention was a more modern 2-story building on the eastern edge of the village that offered commanding views of the entire area. "Sergeant," Walker said, raising his hand, "that building on the east side would provide much better overwatch than positions 3 and 7, higher elevation, broader field of view, better angles for supporting fire if needed." Rodriguez looked at the photograph Walker was indicating. "That's the village school, Walker, off limits for military operations unless there's an immediate threat to life." "But from a tactical standpoint," Rodriguez interrupted firmly, "from a tactical standpoint, we don't occupy civilian buildings unless absolutely necessary. It undermines our relationship with the local population and turns symbols of progress into military targets." Walker persisted, his confidence rebuilding after weeks of staying quiet. "Sergeant,
I understand the political considerations, but if we're really concerned about force protection, shouldn't we prioritize the safety of our soldiers? That building would give us tactical advantages that could prevent casualties." Several squad members exchanged glances. Walker was doing it again, questioning Rodriguez's decisions based on theoretical analysis rather than practical experience. But this time, his argument had some merit from a purely military perspective, which made Rodriguez's position harder to dismiss outright. Corporal Lane decided to intervene before the situation escalated. "Walker, there are considerations beyond just tactical advantage. Hearts and minds matter out here." Walker replied, "Hearts and minds don't stop bullets. If we take effective fire and can't respond because we chose inferior positions for political reasons, those hearts and minds won't matter much to our families back home." Rodriguez felt the familiar frustration building. Walker wasn't entirely wrong about the tactical advantages, but he was missing crucial context about counterinsurgency operations, rules of engagement, and the long-term strategic implications of short-term tactical decisions. "Walker, the school stays off limits," she said with finality. "We'll use positions 3 and 7 as planned. Any other questions?" The patrol loaded up and moved out 30 minutes later, with Walker still quietly convinced that they were accepting unnecessary risks for the sake of political correctness. As they approached the village, Rodriguez deployed the squad according to her original plan, with Overwatch teams taking positions on 2 single-story buildings that provided decent but not optimal fields of view. The initial patrol went smoothly. The village was waking up for the day, with shopkeepers opening their stalls and children heading toward the school that Walker had wanted to occupy. The team moved through the market area in pairs, maintaining visual contact, while Rodriguez spoke with several village elders about recent security concerns. It was during the meeting with the principal village elder that things went wrong. The elder, a weathered man named Haji Abdullah, was in the middle of describing recent Taliban intimidation tactics when his expression suddenly changed. He glanced toward the school building, then back at Rodriguez with obvious concern. "There are men in the school," he said quietly in accented English. "They came before dawn. They have weapons."
Rodriguez felt her blood chill. If insurgents had occupied the school building, the same building Walker had wanted to use for Overwatch, they would have perfect fields of fire on her entire squad. Worse, they would have had hours to prepare positions and plan their attack. She keyed her radio quietly. "All teams, be advised possible hostile presence in the school building. Maintain current positions and await orders." Walker's voice immediately crackled back over the radio. "I knew we should have taken that building. Now we're sitting ducks with inferior Overwatch positions." "Walker, maintain radio discipline," Sergeant Thompson's voice cut in sharply. But Walker's frustration boiled over. "Sergeant Rodriguez, we need to reposition immediately. Our current Overwatch can't effectively cover a withdrawal if we take fire from the school building." Rodriguez was already analyzing the tactical situation, her mind racing through options and contingencies. Walker was right that their current positions were disadvantageous against threats from the school building, but moving now would expose the squad to observation and potential fire from the very building they were trying to counter. "Negative on repositioning," Rodriguez replied calmly. "We move now, we expose ourselves to direct observation. We hold current positions and call for support." "That's exactly the kind of passive thinking that gets people killed," Walker transmitted back, his voice tight with stress and anger. "We should have taken the high ground when we had the chance, and now we need to be aggressive about regaining tactical advantage." The radio fell silent for a moment, as every member of the squad processed Walker's insubordinate response. Even in a developing tactical situation, directly contradicting and criticizing a squad leader over open radio was a serious breach of military discipline. Rodriguez made a decision that would save Walker's life for the second time, though he wouldn't realize it until much later. Instead of repositioning her forces or attempting to assault the school building, she called for immediate close air support and began a careful, methodical withdrawal that kept her soldiers in covered positions while moving them away from potential kill zones.
All teams prepare for bound Overwatch withdrawal. Teams 1 and 2 provide cover while Team 3 moves to Rally Point Alpha. Once Team 3 is in position, Teams 1 and 2 bound back by sections. It was textbook small unit tactics executed with precision under pressure. But Walker, convinced that Rodriguez's caution was going to get them all killed, made a decision that nearly proved fatal. Instead of following orders, he broke from his position and began moving independently toward what he considered to be a better defensive position. "Walker, get back in position," Lane hissed over the radio. "I'm moving to better cover," Walker replied, his voice strained with adrenaline and conviction. That's when Rodriguez spotted the wire. A nearly invisible tripwire stretched across the exact path Walker was taking, connected to an improvised explosive device that had been positioned to catch anyone moving between the buildings, exactly as Walker was doing. "Walker, stop!" Rodriguez shouted over the radio, her voice carrying a desperate urgency that cut through Walker's determination like a blade. Walker froze mid-step, his foot inches from the tripwire that would have triggered an explosion powerful enough to kill him and anyone within 20 meters. In the sudden silence that followed, he could see Rodriguez pointing frantically at the ground near his feet. It took several seconds for his eyes to adjust and pick out the thin wire against the dusty ground. When he finally saw it, his legs nearly buckled with the realization of how close he'd come to death. If Rodriguez hadn't spotted the IED, if she hadn't been watching his movement despite dealing with the tactical situation at the school building, Walker would have been killed by his own impulsive attempt to improve their defensive position. The close air support arrived 10 minutes later, and the insurgents in the school building were either killed or driven off without the squad having to fire a shot. But for Walker, the real lesson wasn't about the successful resolution of the tactical situation. It was about the tripwire he'd almost stepped on, the explosive device that would have ended his life if Rodriguez hadn't been watching out for him even while he was actively disobeying her orders. As they conducted the withdrawal back to their vehicles, Walker found himself replaying the incident over and over. His confidence in his own tactical judgment was shaken, but more importantly, he was beginning to understand that Rodriguez's leadership involved layers of awareness and responsibility that he'd never considered. She wasn't just making tactical decisions, she was simultaneously managing the political implications of those decisions, maintaining situational awareness of threats he couldn't even see, and keeping track of every soldier's position and safety, even when they were making dangerous mistakes.
The ride back to FOB Sentinel was conducted in tense silence, broken only by the routine radio checks and the rumble of the MRAP's engine. Walker sat staring out the armored window, his mind churning through the implications of what had just happened. The tripwire incident had shaken him more than he cared to admit, not just because of how close he'd come to death, but because of what it revealed about his own judgment and decision-making under pressure. Sergeant Thompson, who had witnessed the entire incident through his field glasses, finally broke the silence in their vehicle. "Walker, we need to talk about what happened back there." Walker turned from the window, expecting a lecture about following orders or radio discipline. Instead, he saw something unexpected in Thompson's weathered face. Not anger, but concern, mixed with disappointment. "I know what you're going to say, Sergeant," Walker began. "I shouldn't have broken position, shouldn't have questioned orders over the radio." "That's not what I'm going to say," Thompson interrupted. "What I'm going to say is that your squad leader just saved your life for the second time in 2 weeks, and you still don't seem to understand why that happened." Walker felt a flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. "I understand that I made a mistake with the tripwire." "No, you don't understand," Thompson said firmly. "The tripwire wasn't your mistake. Breaking position was your mistake. Questioning Rodriguez's tactical decisions over open radio in a combat situation was your mistake. The tripwire was just the consequence that almost killed you because of those mistakes." Private Mitchell, who had been quietly cleaning his rifle, looked up. "Walker, can I ask you something? Do you think the sergeant spotted that tripwire by accident?
Walker considered the question. I don't know. Maybe she has better eyes than I do, or maybe she was in a better position to see it. Mitchell shook his head. She spotted it because she's been watching for exactly that kind of threat the entire time we've been out here. While you were focused on tactical positions and fields of fire, she was reading the ground, looking for signs of IEDs, watching for unnatural patterns in the environment. That's what experience looks like, man. It's not just knowing what to do, it's knowing what to look for. Thompson nodded approvingly. Mitchell's right. And here's the thing that really should scare you, Walker. Rodriguez was managing the tactical situation with hostiles in the school building, coordinating with close air support, conducting a withdrawal under pressure, and she still had enough situational awareness to spot a tripwire that you were about to walk into. That's not luck, and it's not just good eyesight. That's the kind of multitasking ability that comes from years of experience in situations where losing focus gets people killed. Walker was quiet for several minutes, processing this perspective. He'd been so focused on what he saw as Rodriguez's tactical shortcomings that he'd completely missed the complex juggling act she was performing every moment they were outside the wire. While he was second-guessing her decisions, she was simultaneously managing threats, coordinating with higher command, monitoring her soldiers' positions, and maintaining the kind of environmental awareness that had just saved his life. I think I've been looking at this all wrong. I've been treating this like an engineering problem, analyzing variables and trying to optimize solutions. But it's not that simple, is it? Combat leadership is like playing three-dimensional chess while someone's shooting at you. Every decision affects multiple variables, and you don't get to see all the pieces on the board. That's why experience matters so much. It's not just knowing the right answers, it's knowing which questions to ask and being able to process information faster than the situation changes. Back at FOB Sentinel, Walker found himself paying closer attention to how she conducted herself during the post-mission debriefing. She provided a detailed account of the tactical situation to Captain Cross, analyzed the intelligence value of the information gathered from the village elder, and coordinated with the intelligence section to update threat assessments for future operations in the area. But what struck Walker most was how she handled his breach of discipline. When Captain Cross asked about the radio communications during the incident, Rodriguez could have easily thrown Walker under the bus for insubordination and failure to follow orders. Instead, she focused on the tactical lessons learned and the successful resolution of the situation.
Sir, the incident reinforced the importance of maintaining unit cohesion during tactical situations, Rodriguez reported. We identified some communications issues that we'll address during our next training cycle. After the captain dismissed them, Walker approached Rodriguez outside the operations center. The evening heat was still oppressive, and the distant sound of generators provided a constant background hum that had become the soundtrack of deployment life. "Sergeant, I wanted to thank you," Walker said, coming to attention, "and I wanted to apologize for my conduct today. I was out of line, both tactically and in terms of military discipline." Rodriguez studied his face, looking for signs of sincerity versus mere compliance. What she saw was a young soldier who was finally beginning to understand the complexity of what he'd been criticizing. "Walker, let me ask you something," she said. "Why do you think I chose not to mention your specific actions in the debriefing?" Walker considered the question carefully. "Because you're protecting me from consequences that I probably deserve?" "Because I'm investing in your potential as a soldier," Rodriguez corrected. "You're smart, Walker. You're analytical, you're brave, and you care about the mission and your fellow soldiers. Those are all valuable qualities. But intelligence without wisdom can be dangerous, and courage without discipline can get people killed." She paused, watching a convoy of supply trucks rumbling toward the main gate. The goal isn't to crush your initiative or make you stop thinking. The goal is to help you understand that there's always more to learn,
always variables you haven't considered, and always consequences you haven't anticipated. Today you learned that the hard way, but you learned it without anyone getting killed. That's actually a pretty good outcome. Walker felt a complex mix of gratitude and shame. How do I get better at this, Sergeant? How do I develop the kind of judgment you showed today? Rodriguez smiled for the first time since they'd returned to base. You start by accepting that you don't know everything, even when you're sure you do. You listen more than you talk, observe more than you analyze, and trust the experience of people who've been where you're trying to go. Most importantly, you understand that being wrong in combat isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's a matter of life and death. As they walked toward the dining facility for evening chow, Walker found himself seeing the base with new eyes. Every security measure, every tactical procedure, every seemingly routine protocol represented lessons learned through experience, often paid for with blood. Rodriguez wasn't just following arbitrary rules or outdated doctrine. She was applying hard-won knowledge to keep her soldiers alive in an environment where second chances were rare and mistakes were often permanent. But Walker's education was far from complete. In the coming weeks, there would be one more incident that would test everything he thought he'd learned about leadership, trust, and the deadly cost of questioning orders at precisely the wrong moment. This final lesson would be the most dramatic of all, and it would forever change how Walker understood the relationship between rank, experience, and survival in combat.
3 weeks had passed since the village incident, and Walker had made a conscious effort to be a better soldier. He listened more during briefings, kept his tactical opinions to himself unless specifically asked, and tried to learn from Rodriguez's decision-making process rather than constantly second-guessing it. The change hadn't gone unnoticed by the rest of the squad, and the tension that had characterized Walker's first month at FOB Sentinel had begun to ease. But old habits die hard, especially when they're reinforced by years of academic success and a natural tendency to analyze problems from multiple angles. Walker's engineering background made it almost impossible for him to simply accept decisions without understanding the reasoning behind them, and his confidence in his own analytical abilities remained strong despite recent setbacks. The mission that would test Walker's newfound humility came down from brigade level with unusual urgency. Intelligence had identified a high-value target, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating IED attacks against coalition forces throughout the region. The target would be vulnerable for a limited window, meeting with local cell leaders in a compound approximately 15 kilometers from FOB Sentinel. The mission brief took place at 0200 hours, with Major Collins herself conducting the briefing alongside the intelligence officer. Walker had never seen this level of command involvement in a squad-level operation, which suggested the target was extremely important to the overall campaign. "This is a time-sensitive target," Major Collins began, her voice crisp with authority. "We have reliable intelligence that Mullah Yassin will be at this compound between 0400 and 0600 hours. After that, he disappears back into the population, and we lose our opportunity." She pointed to satellite imagery showing a typical Afghan compound, high walls surrounding several buildings, with a single main entrance and what appeared to be a secondary gate on the eastern side. The compound is located in rough terrain, accessible by 2 main routes. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez will lead a squad-sized element to conduct the raid. Rodriguez studied the imagery carefully, her experienced eyes picking out details that others might miss. The compound was built into a hillside, with natural barriers on 3 sides that could provide excellent defensive positions for anyone inside. The 2 access routes were obvious avenues of approach, which made them prime locations for ambush or IED placement. Walker, despite his recent efforts to stay quiet, found himself analyzing the tactical situation with growing concern. The timing was extremely tight, the terrain favored defenders, and the intelligence seemed almost too convenient.
everything about the mission felt rushed in a way that violated the careful, methodical planning he'd observed Rodriguez using in previous operations. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, raising her hand, "the timing seems aggressive for this type of target. If we're dealing with a high-value individual who's security conscious enough to have avoided capture this long, wouldn't he have early warning systems in place? The window between 0400 and 600 hours doesn't give us much margin for error if we encounter delays or complications." Major Collins exchanged a glance with the intelligence officer. "The intelligence is solid, Staff Sergeant. The target will be there, and this is our only opportunity to get him. Speed is essential. If we delay, we lose him." Walker felt his analytical instincts flaring. The major's response seemed to dismiss Rodriguez's legitimate tactical concerns without adequate explanation. In his engineering experience, when leadership pushed back against technical questions without providing detailed reasoning, it usually meant they were operating under constraints they couldn't or wouldn't discuss. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After the briefing, as the squad prepared their equipment, Walker approached Rodriguez privately. Despite his recent lessons about questioning orders, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about this mission didn't add up. "Sergeant, can I share an observation?" Walker asked carefully. Rodriguez looked up from her gear check. "Go ahead, but make it quick. We step off in 30 minutes. The intelligence timeline seems unusually precise for this type of target. Most high-value individuals maintain operational security by avoiding predictable patterns. The fact that we know exactly when and where he'll be suggests either exceptional intelligence assets or what, Walker?" asked Rodriguez, though her tone suggested she might be having similar thoughts. Walker hesitated. This was exactly the kind of analytical second-guessing that had gotten him in trouble before. But his engineering training had taught him to identify system failures before they became catastrophic, and everything about this mission felt like a system operating outside normal parameters.
Or it's a trap, Walker finished quietly. The timing, the location, the urgency, it all feels designed to force us into a hasty operation without adequate planning or support. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, her experienced instincts warring with military discipline and the chain of command. She'd had similar thoughts during the briefing, but orders were orders, especially when they came from battalion level with obvious command emphasis. "Walker, I appreciate your analysis," she said finally, "but we have our orders, and the intelligence assessment isn't our call to make. Our job is to execute the mission as directed." Walker nodded, but his unease remained. As they loaded into the vehicles for movement to the target area, he found himself studying the satellite imagery again, looking for details that might have been missed during the rushed briefing. What he saw reinforced his concerns about the tactical situation. The compound was situated in a natural bowl, with elevated positions surrounding it on all sides. Anyone holding those high positions would have commanding fields of fire on the entire area. More troubling, the two access routes converged at a narrow passage just before reaching the compound, a perfect choke point for an ambush. "Sergeant Thompson," Walker said quietly over the vehicle intercom, "have you ever seen intelligence this specific about HVT movements?" Thompson, who'd been unusually quiet since the briefing, glanced at Walker. "Once or twice, usually when someone's been turned or when we're being fed information for reasons we don't understand." The implication hung in the air between them. If the intelligence was coming from a source with questionable motives, the entire operation could be walking into a carefully prepared kill zone. But expressing those doubts now, with the mission already in progress, would be seen as defeatism at best and insubordination at worst. Rodriguez, monitoring the radio traffic from the lead vehicle, was dealing with her own concerns. The radio chatter from higher command seemed more intense than usual, with multiple frequencies active and what sounded like coordination with air assets that hadn't been mentioned in the briefing. Either there were aspects of this operation she hadn't been briefed on, or something was developing that was changing the nature of the mission in real time.
As they approached the target area, Walker's analytical mind continued processing the tactical situation. The terrain was even more challenging than the satellite imagery had suggested, with multiple blind spots and natural defensive positions that would be perfect for enemy forces expecting coalition troops. If this was indeed a trap, it was a well-designed one that exploited the predictable patterns of coalition raid tactics. But Walker had learned enough about military discipline to keep his concerns to himself, at least for now. Rodriguez had made it clear that the time for analysis was over, and the time for execution had begun. His job was to follow orders, trust his leadership, and perform his duties as a soldier. Everything else was above his pay grade and outside his area of responsibility. What Walker didn't realize was that his analytical instincts were about to prove tragically accurate, and that Rodriguez's experience and tactical intuition were all that would stand between the squad and a carefully orchestrated ambush that threatened to kill them all. The third and most dramatic life-saving incident was about to unfold, and this time, Walker's survival would depend entirely on trusting Rodriguez's judgment over his own analytical conclusions.
The convoy reached the dismount point at 0345 hours, 15 minutes ahead of schedule. Rodriguez had pushed the pace during movement, her instincts telling her that something about this operation felt wrong. The intelligence was too clean, the timeline too convenient, and the command emphasis too intense for what should have been a routine high-value target raid. As the squad prepared to move on foot toward the target compound, Rodriguez made a decision that would save their lives. Instead of following the prescribed route outlined in the operation order, she chose to approach from an unexpected direction that would add 20 minutes to their movement but avoid the obvious avenues of approach. "Change of plans," Rodriguez announced over the squad radio. "We're taking the long way around, approach from the northwest instead of the main routes." Walker, who had been studying his map and GPS, immediately saw the problem with this deviation. "Sergeant, that puts us behind schedule. We'll miss the window if Mullah Yassin leaves early." "Better to miss the target than walk into an ambush," Rodriguez replied tersely. But Walker's analytical mind was still working the problem. According to the intelligence briefing, they had reliable information about the target's schedule and location. Deviating from the planned route based on intuition rather than concrete intelligence seemed to violate everything he'd learned about mission planning and execution. "Sergeant, with respect, we're making decisions based on speculation rather than intelligence," Walker said over the radio. "The briefing was clear about the time window. If we're late, we lose the opportunity." Sergeant Thompson's voice cut in sharply. "Walker, maintain radio discipline and follow orders." But the damage was done. Walker's challenge had been heard by the entire squad, and Rodriguez could feel the tension it created. Some of the soldiers might now be questioning whether her decision was based on sound tactical judgment or excessive caution. In a combat situation where unit cohesion could mean the difference between life and death, even minor doubts could have catastrophic consequences. Rodriguez made another decision that demonstrated the difference between leadership and management. Instead of arguing with Walker over the radio or explaining her reasoning in detail, she simply implemented her plan and trusted that results would speak louder than words. The squad began their approach through terrain that was rougher and more challenging than the prescribed routes, but which offered better concealment and multiple escape routes if things went wrong. As they moved, Rodriguez constantly monitored radio traffic from higher command, noting that there seemed to be unusual activity on frequencies that weren't supposed to be involved in their operation. Walker, still convinced that they were making a mistake, found himself paying closer attention to their surroundings as they moved through the unfamiliar terrain. What he saw gradually began to change his perspective on Rodriguez's decision. The prescribed routes would have channeled them through terrain that offered excellent ambush positions, while the route Rodriguez had chosen kept them in areas where they couldn't be easily surrounded or trapped. About halfway to the target, Rodriguez called for a halt. Through her binoculars, she was studying the compound and the surrounding terrain, looking for signs that something wasn't right. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. "All teams hold position," she whispered into her radio. "Possible enemy activity around the target area." Walker raised his own binoculars and studied the compound. At first, he didn't see anything unusual, just the typical Afghan compound with high walls and a few outbuildings. But as his eyes adjusted and he began to look more systematically, he started to notice details that didn't belong.
There were fresh fighting positions dug into the hillside surrounding the compound, vehicle tracks that suggested recent movement of heavy equipment. Most tellingly, there were no signs of normal civilian activity around a compound that was supposed to be hosting a meeting of Taliban leadership. "I see it," Walker whispered into his radio. "The whole area has been prepared for defense. This isn't a meeting, it's a trap." Rodriguez keyed her radio to contact higher command. "Base, this is Patrol 7. We have eyes on target area and observe signs of enemy preparation. Recommend abort and reassess." The response came back immediately, with an edge of urgency that confirmed Rodriguez's suspicions. "Patrol 7, negative on abort. Mission is time critical. Proceed as directed." Walker listened to the radio exchange with growing alarm. Higher command was insisting they proceed with a mission that looked increasingly like a carefully planned ambush. Either the intelligence was completely wrong, or someone wanted them to walk into a trap for reasons that had nothing to do with capturing Muli Yassin. "Sergeant, what if this isn't about the HVT at all? What if someone wants coalition forces to take casualties here for political or strategic reasons we don't understand?"
It was a sophisticated analysis that demonstrated how much Walker had learned about the complexities of counterinsurgency operations. But it was also exactly the kind of speculation that could paralyze decision-making in a combat situation where action was required regardless of uncertainty. Rodriguez studied the tactical situation through her binoculars while processing Walker's question. If he was right, proceeding with the mission would likely result in casualties or deaths among her soldiers. If he was wrong, aborting would mean missing a genuine opportunity to capture a high-value target and potentially facing disciplinary action for failure to follow orders. "Walker, you might be right," Rodriguez said quietly, "but we're soldiers, not politicians. Our job is to execute the mission as ordered and bring everyone home alive. Sometimes those two objectives conflict, and when they do, I choose bringing people home." She made a decision that would define her leadership and save Walker's life for the third time. Instead of proceeding with the frontal assault outlined in the operation order, Rodriguez chose to conduct a reconnaissance by fire, a technique that would reveal enemy positions without fully committing her forces to the attack. "All teams, we're going to probe the target area with indirect fire first. If there are enemy forces waiting for us, this will force them to reveal their positions. If the area is clear, we proceed with the assault as planned." Walker understood the tactical wisdom of the decision, but he also understood its implications. Rodriguez was essentially betting her career on the assumption that the intelligence was flawed and that proceeding as ordered would result in American casualties. "Sergeant," Walker said, "if you're wrong about this, if the area is clear and we're just being overcautious, then I'll face the consequences," Rodriguez interrupted. "But if I'm right, we all go home alive. That's a trade I'm willing to make." As Rodriguez coordinated with the fire support team to begin the reconnaissance by fire, Walker realized that he was witnessing leadership at its highest level. Rodriguez wasn't just making tactical decisions. She was accepting personal responsibility for the safety of her soldiers, even when it might conflict with direct orders from higher command. The first rounds of indirect fire landed near the compound at 0430 hours. The response was immediate and devastating. Multiple machine gun positions opened fire from concealed bunkers. Rocket-propelled grenades streaked toward the suspected location of the coalition forces, and the entire area erupted in a coordinated defensive fire that would have annihilated anyone attempting a direct assault. Walker lay pressed against the rocky ground, listening to the volume of fire coming from the compound area, and realized that Rodriguez had just saved all of their lives. If they had proceeded with the original plan, if they had approached from the prescribed routes at the scheduled time, they would have walked directly into a kill zone that had been prepared specifically for coalition forces. "My God," Walker whispered into his radio. "They were waiting for us."
Rodriguez's voice came back calm and professional, despite the chaos of enemy fire around them. Now you understand why experience matters, Walker. Sometimes the most important decision a leader can make is the decision not to do what you're ordered to do.
The enemy fire continued for another 10 minutes before gradually tapering off. Rodriguez had called in close air support and artillery strikes on the compound, but the real damage had already been done to the enemy's plan. By revealing their positions prematurely, the insurgents had lost the element of surprise that would have made their ambush devastatingly effective. As the squad began their tactical withdrawal to the extraction point, Walker found himself processing the full implications of what had just occurred. The intelligence that had seemed so reliable was clearly compromised. The mission that had been presented as time-critical was actually designed to lure coalition forces into a prepared kill zone. Most importantly, Rodriguez's decision to trust her instincts over direct orders had saved the lives of every soldier in the squad. "Base, this is Patrol 7, Rodriguez reported over the radio as they moved away from the ambush site. "Mission abort due to enemy ambush at target location. No friendly casualties. Multiple enemy positions destroyed. Request immediate debrief upon return to base." The response from higher command was notably different in tone from their earlier insistence on proceeding with the mission. "Patrol 7, roger your report. Well done on avoiding casualties. Return to base for full debrief." Walker noticed the change immediately. The urgency about capturing Mullah Yassin had suddenly disappeared, replaced by what sounded almost like relief that the squad had survived the encounter. It was another piece of evidence supporting the theory that this mission had been about something other than capturing a high-value target. During the movement back to FOB's Sentinel, Walker found himself reflecting on the series of decisions that had kept them all alive. Rodriguez's choice to deviate from the prescribed route, her decision to conduct reconnaissance by fire instead of a direct assault. Most importantly, her willingness to disobey direct orders when those orders would have resulted in American casualties. "Sergeant Thompson," Walker said over the vehicle intercom, "how often do squad leaders have to make decisions like that, choosing between following orders and protecting their soldiers?" Thompson was quiet for a moment before responding. "More often than you'd think, Walker, and it's the hardest part of leadership in combat. You swear an oath to follow orders, but you also have a responsibility to the soldiers under your command. When those two things conflict, you have to decide which principle matters more." Walker considered this. In his engineering background, conflicts between requirements usually meant going back to the customer for clarification, or finding a technical solution that satisfied all constraints. But in combat leadership, sometimes there were no good options, only choices between different types of failure. "How do you know when to trust your instincts over official intelligence?" Walker asked. "Experience," Thompson replied simply. "Rodriguez has been in enough situations like this to recognize the patterns. When intelligence is too convenient, when timelines are too tight, when command is pushing too hard for a specific course of action, those are warning signs that something else is going on." As they approached FOB Sentinel, Walker could see increased activity around the command post. Multiple vehicles were parked outside, including some that belonged to higher-ranking officers than normally visited their forward operating base. Whatever had happened today was going to have implications beyond their squad level. The debriefing took place immediately upon their return, with Major Collins, Captain Cross, and two officers Walker didn't recognize, a lieutenant colonel and a civilian who might have been intelligence or State Department. The questions were detailed and focused not just on the tactical situation, but on the decision-making process that had led Rodriguez to deviate from the prescribed mission plan. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," the lieutenant colonel began, "you chose to disobey direct orders to proceed with the assault despite clear instructions from higher command. Can you explain your reasoning?"
Rodriguez stood at attention, her response crisp and professional. "Sir, my assessment of the tactical situation indicated a high probability of enemy ambush. My primary responsibility is the safety and effectiveness of the soldiers under my command. When those two considerations conflicted with the prescribed mission parameters, I chose to prioritize force protection." The civilian leaned forward. "Staff Sergeant,
The intelligence assessment indicated a low-threat environment with minimal enemy presence. What made you doubt that assessment? Sir, the terrain analysis showed obvious ambush positions that hadn't been addressed in the mission planning. The timeline was unusually specific for a high-value target known for operational security. Most importantly, my experience suggested that the combination of factors indicated a prepared enemy response rather than a routine raid opportunity. Walker listened to the exchange with growing admiration for Rodriguez's composure under what was clearly intense scrutiny. She was defending decisions that had saved lives, but she was also acknowledging that she had disobeyed direct orders in a military culture where obedience to authority was fundamental. Major Collins spoke up. Staff Sergeant, Private Walker raised concerns about the mission parameters before and during the operation. Did his input influence your decision-making? Rodriguez glanced briefly at Walker before responding. Sir, Private Walker demonstrated good analytical thinking in identifying potential problems with the mission. However, my tactical decisions were based on my own assessment of the situation and my experience in similar operations. Private Walker's observations were noted, but they were not the primary factor in my decision-making process. Walker felt a surge of gratitude. Rodriguez had saved all their lives, had demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership that kept soldiers alive in combat, and now she was facing potential disciplinary action for refusing to march them into a kill zone. Sir, Walker said, standing up without permission, request permission to speak. The lieutenant colonel looked surprised. Private, this is not an appropriate forum for... Sir, with respect, Walker interrupted, his voice carrying a conviction that surprised even him. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez saved my life 3 times during my deployment here. Today was just the most dramatic example. She didn't disobey orders because she was being insubordinate or because she questioned authority. She disobeyed orders because following them would have gotten American soldiers killed for no tactical advantage. The room fell silent. Walker knew he was risking his own career by speaking up, but he couldn't stand by and watch Rodriguez be punished for decisions that demonstrated the highest level of military leadership he'd ever witnessed. Major Collins looked at Walker with surprise and something that might have been respect. Private Walker, that's a serious statement. Are you prepared to provide a detailed account of these incidents for the investigation? Walker looked at Rodriguez, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. Yes, ma'am. I am prepared to testify that Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's leadership and decision-making have been exemplary throughout my time under her command. The civilian made a note on his pad. This investigation will be comprehensive and will examine all aspects of today's operation, including the intelligence assessment and command decisions that led to the mission parameters. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, you are restricted to base pending completion of the investigation, but you remain in command of your squad. As the debriefing concluded, Walker realized that the third life-saving incident wasn't just about Rodriguez's tactical decision to avoid the ambush. It was about her willingness to sacrifice her own career to protect her soldiers, and about his own growth from a questioning rookie to someone who finally understood what real leadership looked like in combat.
The investigation into the failed ambush mission lasted 2 weeks, during which FOB Sentinel buzzed with rumors and speculation. Walker found himself at the center of multiple interviews with investigators from Criminal Investigation Division, Military Intelligence, and what appeared to be representatives from various agencies whose exact affiliations remained unclear. Each interview followed a similar pattern. Investigators would ask detailed questions about Rodriguez's decision-making process, her leadership style, and whether Walker had observed any signs of insubordination or failure to follow proper military procedures. What they seemed most interested in was whether Rodriguez had been influenced by outside factors or had acted on information beyond what was provided in official intelligence briefings. Walker's responses remained consistent throughout all the interviews. Rodriguez had demonstrated exceptional leadership, had made tactical decisions based on sound military judgment, and had prioritized the safety of her soldiers while maintaining focus on mission objectives.
He emphasized that her decision to avoid the prescribed assault routes had saved American lives and had revealed a sophisticated enemy ambush that would have resulted in significant casualties. What Walker didn't mention in his official statements, but what he discussed privately with Sergeant Thompson and other squad members, was his growing suspicion that the investigation wasn't really about Rodriguez's conduct. The questions seemed designed to determine whether she knew something she wasn't supposed to know, or whether her instincts had simply been good enough to avoid a trap that someone in the intelligence chain had either missed or ignored. They're trying to figure out if she knew something she wasn't supposed to know, Thompson explained during one of their evening conversations in the dining facility. The alternative is that their intelligence was compromised or that someone set up that ambush deliberately, and neither of those possibilities makes the higher-ups look good. Walker pushed his food around his plate, appetite diminished by the stress of the situation. What happens if they decide she was insubordinate? Court-martial? Could be anything from a letter of reprimand to court-martial, depending on how badly they need a scapegoat. The problem is that Rodriguez saved our lives by doing exactly what good leaders are supposed to do, putting their soldiers' welfare ahead of their own careers. But the Army doesn't always reward that kind of leadership, especially when it makes other people look incompetent. The breakthrough in Walker's understanding came during his final interview with the lieutenant colonel who had conducted the initial debriefing. Instead of focusing on Rodriguez's actions, the investigator asked Walker to describe his own evolution as a soldier during his deployment. Private Walker, your initial reports from training and your early weeks here suggested some difficulty adapting to combat leadership structures. Your instructors described you as intelligent and capable, but prone to questioning authority and second-guessing tactical decisions. How would you characterize your development since arriving at FOB Sentinel? Walker considered the question carefully. It was an opportunity to explain not just his own growth, but the quality of leadership that had made that growth possible. Sir, when I arrived here, I thought leadership was about having the right answers and making optimal decisions based on available information. I had confidence in my analytical abilities and education, and I assumed that good leaders would welcome technical input and alternative perspectives. He paused, organizing his thoughts. What I learned from Staff Sergeant Rodriguez is that combat leadership involves managing variables and risks that can't be analyzed in traditional ways. She wasn't dismissing my input because she didn't value analytical thinking. She was integrating my observations into a much more complex decision-making process that accounted for factors I couldn't see or understand. The lieutenant colonel made notes while Walker continued. The 3 incidents where she saved my life weren't accidents or lucky guesses. They were the result of experience, situational awareness, and a level of tactical intuition that comes from years of making life-and-death decisions under pressure. Each time I thought I understood the situation well enough to question her judgment. Each time I was wrong in ways that could have been fatal. Describe the pattern you observed in your own thinking.
Walker reflected on the progression from the Wadi route to the tripwire incident to the final ambush. I was consistently focused on immediate tactical considerations, efficiency, optimization, technical solutions to specific problems. Rodriguez was operating at a strategic level that considered long-term consequences, political implications, enemy patterns, and soldier welfare simultaneously. I was playing checkers while she was playing chess. The lieutenant colonel leaned forward. Private Walker, in your assessment, was Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's decision to disobey direct orders during the final mission justified? This was the crucial question, the one that could determine Rodriguez's fate. Walker understood that his answer would carry weight because he had been the squad member most likely to question her judgment, making his support particularly credible. Sir, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's decision was not just justified, it was exemplary leadership, Walker said firmly. She recognized that following orders would result in American casualties for no tactical gain.
She chose to accept personal risk to her career in order to protect the lives of her soldiers. That's not insubordination. That's the highest form of military leadership. Walker paused, then continued with growing conviction. Sir, if we punish leaders for making decisions that save American lives, we're sending a message that following orders is more important than bringing soldiers home alive. That's not the kind of army I want to serve in, and it's not the kind of leadership that wins wars. The lieutenant colonel studied Walker's face, looking for signs of coaching or rehearsed responses. What he saw was genuine conviction from a young soldier who had learned difficult lessons about leadership through direct experience. Private Walker, you understand that your testimony could have significant impact on Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's career and on broader questions about command authority and tactical decision-making. Yes, sir. And I understand that my support for her might not be popular with everyone in the chain of command, but I also understand that she put her career on the line to keep me and my fellow soldiers alive. The least I can do is tell the truth about what kind of leader she is. The interview concluded with the lieutenant colonel making extensive notes and requesting copies of Walker's written statements from previous sessions. As Walker left the interview room, he felt a mixture of anxiety and satisfaction. He had done everything he could to support the leader who had saved his life multiple times, but the outcome was still uncertain. That evening, Rodriguez approached Walker outside the communications tent where he'd been calling home to update his family on the situation. Walker, I heard about your interview today. Thompson told me you went to bat for me pretty hard with the investigators. Walker studied her face, noting the stress lines that hadn't been there when he'd first arrived at FOB Sentinel. Sir, you saved my life 3 times and taught me what real leadership looks like. Supporting you isn't going to bat for you. It's just telling the truth. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and red. You know, when you first got here, I wasn't sure you were going to make it as an infantry soldier. Too much thinking, not enough accepting. But you've become exactly the kind of soldier every leader wants in their squad. Intelligent enough to see problems, experienced enough to understand context, and disciplined enough to trust the chain of command when it matters. Walker felt a warmth of pride that was different from academic achievement or technical recognition. This was approval from someone whose opinion had been earned through shared danger and mutual respect. What happens now? Walker asked. Rodriguez shrugged. Now we wait for people with more rank than us to decide whether doing the right thing is worth more than following orders. Either way, Walker, remember what you've learned here. Leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about making the best decisions you can with incomplete information and accepting responsibility for the consequences.
The investigation concluded 3 days later with a formation that brought together not just Walker's squad, but the entire company. Major Collins stood before the assembled soldiers with a bearing that suggested the outcome was significant enough to warrant formal recognition, rather than quiet administrative action. Walker stood in formation between Thompson and Mitchell, his stomach tight with anxiety about what they were about to hear. The past 2 weeks had been filled with rumors ranging from court-martial proceedings to commendations, and the uncertainty had affected the morale of everyone who served under Rodriguez's leadership. Soldiers, Major Collins began, her voice carrying across the formation with crisp authority. The investigation into the events of September 15th has been completed. The findings have implications not just for our unit, but for how the Army approaches tactical decision-making in complex combat environments. She paused, consulting her notes before continuing. The investigation revealed that the intelligence assessment for the high-value target mission was compromised from multiple sources. Enemy forces had detailed advanced knowledge of coalition raid tactics and had prepared defensive positions specifically designed to inflict maximum casualties on American forces. Walker felt his pulse quicken.
The investigation had confirmed what Rodriguez's instincts had told her. The mission had been a trap from the beginning. Furthermore, Major Collins continued, analysis of communications intercepts and captured enemy documents indicates that insurgent forces had been monitoring coalition intelligence networks and feeding false information designed to lure our forces into prepared ambush sites. The September 15th mission was part of a coordinated campaign to inflict strategic-level casualties that would influence American public opinion and policy decisions. The implications hit Walker like a physical blow. Rodriguez hadn't just saved their squad from a tactical ambush, she had prevented their deaths from being used as propaganda tools in a broader strategic campaign against American involvement in Afghanistan. "Staff Sergeant Isabella Rodriguez," Major Collins called out. Rodriguez stepped forward from the formation and came to attention in front of the commanding officer. Her posture was perfect, but Walker could see the tension in her shoulders as she awaited the formal announcement of her fate. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, your decision to disobey direct orders on September 15th initially appeared to constitute a serious breach of military discipline," Major Collins said, her voice formal and official. "However, the investigation has determined that your actions were consistent with the highest traditions of military leadership and your primary duty to protect the welfare of soldiers under your command." Walker felt a surge of relief so intense it was almost dizzying. Rodriguez was going to be vindicated rather than punished. Major Collins continued reading from her prepared statement. "Your tactical decision-making demonstrated exactly the kind of situational awareness and independent judgment that we expect from non-commissioned officers in combat leadership positions. By trusting your experience over flawed intelligence, you prevented what would have been a catastrophic loss of American lives." She paused and looked directly at Rodriguez. "Furthermore, your willingness to accept personal risk to your career in order to protect your soldiers exemplifies the selfless service that is the foundation of military leadership. The Army needs more leaders who understand that sometimes the most important orders to follow are the ones that aren't written down, the moral imperatives that define what it means to serve with honor." Major Collins reached into her pocket and removed a small blue folder containing what Walker could see were official documents and a medal case. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, by order of the Secretary of the Army, you are hereby awarded the Bronze Star Medal for exceptionally meritorious service in connection with military operations against an armed enemy." The citation that followed detailed Rodriguez's leadership during multiple combat operations, specifically highlighting her tactical acumen, moral courage, and unwavering commitment to soldier welfare in the face of complex and dangerous situations. Walker watched Rodriguez accept the medal with the same calm professionalism she brought to everything else, but he could see the emotion in her eyes. This wasn't just recognition for one decision, it was validation of her entire approach to combat leadership. But Major Collins wasn't finished. "Private First Class Ethan Walker, step forward." Walker's heart nearly stopped. He hadn't expected to be singled out during Rodriguez's recognition ceremony. He moved forward and came to attention beside Rodriguez, wondering what was about to happen. "Private Walker, the investigation noted your initial challenges in adapting to military leadership structures," Major Collins said, and Walker felt his face flush with embarrassment. "However, it also noted your remarkable growth as a soldier and your strong support for your squad leader during a difficult period when that support required personal courage."
She consulted her notes again. "Your testimony during the investigation demonstrated not just loyalty to your leader, but a sophisticated understanding of the complexities of combat leadership that many soldiers never develop. Your willingness to speak truth to power, even when that truth might have been unpopular, reflects the kind of moral courage that the Army needs in its future leaders." Walker stood frozen, unsure where this was heading. "Private Walker, you are hereby promoted to the rank of corporal, effective immediately," Major Collins announced. "Additionally, you are selected for enrollment in the Warrior Leader course upon completion of your current deployment. The Army has identified you as having strong potential for advancement to non-commissioned officer rank." The formation remained silent, but Walker could feel the approval of his fellow soldiers.
Thompson gave him an almost imperceptible nod, and he caught Mitchell grinning despite the formal nature of the ceremony. After the formation was dismissed, Walker found himself surrounded by soldiers offering congratulations and good-natured ribbing about his rapid promotion. But what mattered most to him was the conversation he had with Rodriguez as they walked back toward the squad area. "Congratulations on the Bronze Star, Sergeant," Walker said. "You deserved that recognition, and a lot more." Rodriguez adjusted the medal case in her hands. "Walker, or should I say Corporal Walker, I want you to understand something important about what happened here. The medal is nice, but the real victory is that everyone came home alive. That's what matters in combat leadership. Not the recognition, not the career advancement, but making sure the people who trust you with their lives get to see their families again." Walker nodded, understanding now what he had missed during his first months at FOB Sentinel. Leadership wasn't about being right or making optimal decisions. It was about accepting responsibility for other people's welfare and making whatever sacrifices were necessary to honor that trust. "I learned more from you in 3 months than I learned in 4 years of college, not just about tactics or military procedures, but about what it means to be responsible for other people." Rodriguez smiled, the first completely relaxed expression Walker had seen from her since the investigation began. "Walker, or should I say Corporal Walker, you questioned my orders 3 times, and all 3 times you taught me something important about leadership. Good leaders don't just give orders. They create environments where smart people like you can contribute while still maintaining the discipline and unity that keeps everyone alive." As they reached the squad area, Walker realized that his transformation from questioning rookie to trusted NCO wasn't just about learning to follow orders. It was about learning when to question, when to trust, when to speak up, and when to accept responsibility. Most importantly, it was about understanding that real leadership meant serving something bigger than yourself, whether that was mission accomplishment, soldier welfare, or the moral principles that made military service meaningful. The rookie who had questioned Rodriguez's orders because he thought he knew better had become a corporal who understood that sometimes the most important thing a leader can do is trust the experience and judgment of those who have earned the right to make life and death decisions.
6 months later, Walker stood in the same briefing tent where he had first challenged Rodriguez's tactical decisions, but everything about that dynamic had changed. He wore the chevrons of a corporal now, and more importantly, he carried himself with the confidence that came from hard-earned experience rather than untested theory. Walker was conducting his first mission briefing as a team leader, preparing to take a group of newly arrived soldiers on what had become a routine patrol through sectors that had once seemed impossibly dangerous. As he studied the faces of the privates sitting before him, young, eager, and convinced they understood warfare better than their leaders, Walker couldn't help but smile at the familiar pattern. "The route today takes us through the Wadi system north of Kalar village," Walker explained, pointing to the tactical map. "It's longer than the main road, but it keeps us below the ridgeline and away from known observation points." A hand shot up immediately. Private Jenkins, fresh out of Fort Benning with an economics degree and 3 weeks in country. "Corporal, wouldn't it make more sense to use the main road? We could cut 2 hours off the patrol time and still accomplish the mission." Walker felt a moment of déjà vu so intense it was almost amusing. Here was another smart, educated soldier questioning tactical decisions based on theoretical optimization rather than practical experience. But instead of irritation, Walker felt something closer to sympathy. "Private Jenkins, why do you think the main road would be preferable?" Walker asked, genuinely curious about the reasoning. Jenkins leaned forward, his confidence evident. "Efficiency, Corporal. The main road is a numb quantity. We have good overwatch positions, and speed of movement reduces our exposure time. Basic risk management suggests that shorter exposure duration outweighs terrain advantages."
It was a reasonable analysis from someone operating with limited information and classroom knowledge. Walker remembered making similar arguments to Rodriguez, absolutely certain that his logic was unassailable. Jenkins, have you studied the casualty reports for main road operations in this sector? Some, Corporal, but most of those incidents involved units that weren't following proper security protocols or weren't using available technology effectively. Walker nodded, recognizing the pattern of thinking that assumed previous failures were due to incompetence rather than the inherent challenges of operating in a complex environment. He had once thought the same way. "Here's what we're going to do," Walker said, making a decision that Rodriguez had taught him was sometimes necessary. "We'll take the Wadi route as planned. During the patrol, I want you to observe everything: the terrain, the sight lines, the places where an enemy could position themselves, the natural choke points where we'd be vulnerable. At the end of the day, we'll discuss what you observed and why the route selection mattered." It was the same patient approach Rodriguez had used with him, teaching through experience rather than argument. Walker had learned that some lessons couldn't be taught in briefing tents. They had to be discovered through direct observation and reflection. The patrol proceeded without incident, but Walker made sure to point out tactical details that Jenkins might have missed. The elevated positions surrounding the main road that would provide perfect fields of fire for enemy observers. The fresh vehicle tracks that indicated recent activity by unknown actors. The subtle signs of ground disturbance that might indicate buried explosives or fighting positions. By the end of the day, Jenkins was asking different questions. Instead of challenging the route selection, he was asking about how to read terrain, how to identify threats, and how to balance multiple risk factors simultaneously. "Corporal," Jenkins said, during the after-action review, "I think I understand why you chose the Wadi route. It wasn't just about avoiding the main road, it was about controlling all the variables we could control while accepting that some risks are unavoidable."
Exactly, Walker said. And that's why experience matters so much in combat leadership. It's not that education and analytical thinking aren't valuable. They absolutely are. But they have to be integrated with situational awareness, pattern recognition, and the kind of intuitive understanding that only comes from repeated exposure to complex, high-stakes situations. Later that evening, Walker sought out Rodriguez, who was now preparing for her own promotion to Sergeant First Class and assignment to a leadership position at battalion level. He found her in the communications tent, reviewing intelligence reports and coordinating with other units across the region. "Sergeant, I had an interesting experience today," Walker said, settling into a chair beside her workstation. Rodriguez looked up from her reports. "Let me guess, one of your new guys questioned your tactical decisions based on theoretical analysis and optimization principles." Walker laughed. "Jenkins. Economics degree, 3 weeks in country, absolutely certain that efficiency trumps everything else." "And how did you handle it?" Rodriguez asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "The same way you handled me," Walker replied. "Patient teaching, practical demonstration, and letting experience do the talking, instead of trying to argue with someone who isn't ready to hear the argument yet." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Walker, that's the most important lesson you'll learn as a leader. You can't argue people out of positions they didn't think their way into. You have to give them opportunities to discover the truth for themselves." She paused, looking out the tent opening at the familiar chaos of the forward operating base. "You know, when you first got here, I wasn't sure you were going to make it as an infantry soldier. Too much thinking, not enough trusting. But you learned something that a lot of smart people never learn, that intelligence without wisdom can be dangerous, and that the smartest thing you can do is recognize what you don't know." Walker felt the same warmth of approval that he'd felt during their previous conversation, but this time it was tempered with understanding of what Rodriguez had invested in his development. She had saved his life 3 times, but more importantly, she had taught him how to save others. "Sergeant, I want you to know that everything I learned about leadership, I learned from watching you. Not just the tactical stuff, but the way you balanced mission requirements with soldier welfare, the way you made difficult decisions under pressure, and most importantly, the way you took responsibility for outcomes even when the system was trying to punish you for doing the right thing."
Rodriguez gathered her reports and stood up, preparing to head back to her quarters. Walker, the best leaders are the ones who understand that their job is to develop other leaders. Today, you started that process with Jenkins. Someday, if you're lucky, you'll watch him have the same conversation with one of his soldiers, and you'll realize that leadership isn't just about individual decisions. It's about creating a culture where good decision-making gets passed down through generations of soldiers. As they walked across the base together, Walker reflected on the journey from questioning rookie to trusted leader. He had arrived at FOB Sentinel convinced that his education and analytical abilities qualified him to second-guess experienced leaders. He was leaving as someone who understood that true leadership meant serving something bigger than himself and accepting responsibility for the welfare of others. The rookie who had questioned Rodriguez's orders had learned that sometimes the most important questions aren't about tactics or optimization. They're about trust, responsibility, and the moral courage to do what is right even when it's difficult. Most importantly, he had learned that the best leaders are those who understand the difference between being smart and being wise, and who use their own experience to develop that wisdom in others. 3 times, Rodriguez had saved his life. But the most important thing she had given him was the understanding that real leadership meant being willing to save others, even when the cost was personal sacrifice. It was a lesson Walker would carry with him for the rest of his career, and one he would pass on to the next generation of soldiers who would arrive convinced they knew better than their leaders, until experience taught them the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.